And a final question here, when do coping strategies cross over into masking?
I'll attempt to take that, but happy for Kieran or Amy to jump in at any point. I think when the autonomy is lost, as an adult, I have a relative amount of autonomy over, very much the same as Kieran. I'm self-employed. Um, I use coping strategies for events, places, people that I have chosen to engage with. Um, those places aren't forced upon me. If somewhere feels, if I feel that somewhere's going to be too much, or that I'm not actually that motivated by it, I'm not going to bother using any coping strategies to do that, because that would be detrimental to me. I mean, it sort of links in with the energy accounting, doesn't it? And how much of this will charge me? Because you can you can be in a place that can recharge you and decharge you. Um, but it is about autonomy. Very much the same as Kieran's household. My children have a lot of autonomy, in comparison to some households. But like we touched on earlier, there's something about Western culture that doesn't trust children. We don't trust them to make the right choices. Typical parenting is all about controlling our children. And if we don't control our children, we're not good parents. If we don't have power over our children, we're not good parents. And we need to shift away from that for all children, but particularly for autistic children. Particularly for autistic children in burnout, because the need for autonomy is really, really heightened in that time, because these children are in their brains are in survival mode, and their brains know exactly what they can and can't manage, and they need to be trusted.
Just to kind of add there as well that a lot of this thing around coping strategies, and we have this narrative of resilience and things as well that kind of floats around. And I personally don't know any more resilient group than autistic people. um but yeah, we have to be more resilient because we have to fit in and we have to do what society expects of us. And but actually, when we're talking about society, we're talking about that mainstream neurotypical society that isn't actually very inclusive at all. Which is not what society is supposed to be about. Society, we're all part of society, whether we're part of neurotypical society or not. We're still part of wider society. But when we're using things like coping strategies and things, I mean, there's an element there where certain things can support us to do certain things and navigate certain situations. That's absolutely true. But like Jodie said, when we lose that autonomy, then it becomes about actually what we're doing is facilitating your ability to mask and fit in with everybody else. Now, there's a common thing around people who struggle with executive functioning. Executive functioning is a symptom of dysregulation. I strongly believe that, and the more dysregulated you are, the less able you are to plan and do things in a certain order. But sometimes the order that we're expected to do things isn't the right order for us. So actually, do we have a problem with executive dysfunction, or actually are we being asked to do things in a way which we can't do? Now, those are two very, very different things, but yet we have, particularly around people who are ADHD, we have this narrative now where we've got these things to help us with our executive function, and we can access this, and like whole computer programs and things that are designed to manage and micromanage our lives, which you have to train to learn how to do. Which, firstly, for someone who's ADHD, that's a nightmare within itself. That's just a whole other level of pressure. But also, what those things are doing are telling us that there's only one way to do things when there aren't. There are multiple ways of doing things. And when we talk about things like reasonable adjustments, what we're actually saying at the moment, the way that reasonable adjustments are viewed are, let's give you reasonable adjustments so we can shoehorn you into the way that we need you to do things. When in actual fact, reasonable adjustments should be saying, how do we best help you get to the end goal that you want to get to? Which is a very, very different thing. But again, we have systems and organizations and health and education are set up in ways where, and employment are set up in ways where we only do things in one way. So we have to make everybody do things in those ways. When in actual fact, again, if we come back to that idea of difference that Amy spoke so eloquently about, and recognizing and validating difference and being supportive of difference, we recognize that there's multiple different ways of doing things. All four of us here will live our lives in very different ways, making different choices, doing things in different manners, but we'll all end up with the same goals, hopefully, of being healthy, of being mentally well, of doing our jobs, and blah, blah, blah. If you made us to all do the same job, we'd all do it in very different ways, but we'd still have the same outcome. But society perceives there's only one way of doing it, which is where things like coping strategies, I think, go vastly wrong. Because who wants to cope? We should be thriving. That's a very different thing, and we should all be thriving in the way that we individually need to, not coping with things just because society says that's what we have to do.
Thank you. Thank you very much on that big thought. We'll wrap up. Thanks very much for answering those questions. That was really helpful, insightful.